The morning sun rose slowly over the dense forest, spilling golden light through the tall trees and onto the soft, damp earth. Birds began their songs, filling the air with sound, and a gentle breeze carried the smell of moss and wet leaves. In a small clearing, a group of researchers worked busily, unpacking gear from their vehicles and setting up a base camp. They had traveled many hours to reach this remote forest, a place largely untouched by humans and known for its unusual wildlife. Each member of the team had a role. Some handled scientific equipment, others organized supplies, and a few began clearing small areas for tents. Their excitement was evident in their hurried movements and bright eyes. This expedition had been months in the making, carefully planned with schedules, maps, and lists of tasks, and now the moment they had been waiting for had finally arrived. They were supposed to meet their friends, fellow researchers from a nearby station, later that day. Together, the two groups would explore the forest, observe its creatures, and collect samples for their studies. The team had been looking forward to this collaboration for weeks, imagining the discoveries they would make and the stories they would share. They joked with each other about who would spot the first rare animal, laughing easily, though there was a subtle tension beneath their cheerful words. After all, being deep in a wild and largely unexplored forest was not without risk. Despite the excitement, the forest itself seemed to carry a quiet energy. The usual sounds of wildlife, the rustling of small animals, the chirping of birds, and the buzzing of insects, felt different. There was a strange sharpness to the air, a sense that someone or something was watching. One of the team members paused for a moment, scanning the trees around them. "It feels alive," he said softly. The others glanced at him, half in amusement, half in agreement. They had heard stories about forests like this where the balance of nature was fragile and the creatures within could be unpredictable. Still, they shook off the unease and continued their preparations. The base camp began to take shape. Tents were pitched carefully in a small clearing where sunlight could reach them, providing warmth during the cooler morning hours. Equipment, for research, including cameras, observation tools, and notebooks, was organized and double-checked. The team's leader, a tall man with years of field experience, walked through the camp, giving instructions and making sure everyone knew their responsibilities. His calm demeanor helped steady the group's nerves, and his reminders of safety protocols ensured that no one took unnecessary risks. They were professionals, after all, trained to work in challenging conditions. As the hours passed, the forest's atmosphere seemed to change. Shadows shifted in the corners of the clearing, and the breeze carried faint, unfamiliar sounds. The team members began noticing small details that had initially gone unnoticed. Broken branches where something had passed through, subtle indentations in the soft earth, and the occasional low, echoing call of an animal they could not identify. Curiosity replaced some of the earlier unease, and the researchers began speculating about what kind of wildlife they might encounter. They were excited, but a sense of caution began to settle in, reminding them that this forest was not fully known to anyone. Time passed slowly as they waited for their friends. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting dappled light on the ground, and the team worked together to organize their temporary home. Meals were prepared quickly on portable stoves, and water was collected from a nearby stream, filtered, and stored in containers. Every task was done with care, not just for efficiency but for safety. They knew that even small mistakes could have consequences in such an isolated environment. Conversations among the team shifted from planning their work to storytelling. They shared personal experiences from previous expeditions, recounting moments of discovery and the occasional scare. Laughter rang out across the clearing, blending with the sounds of the forest. For a brief time, the strange feeling of tension seemed to fade, replaced by the comfort of camaraderie. Yet in quiet moments, each member glanced around the edges of the clearing, half expecting to see movement that wasn't there. It was a natural reaction to being in a place so wild and unfamiliar. By mid-afternoon, it became clear that their friends would not arrive immediately. Messages sent via radio were met with delayed responses, and there were no signs of other humans along the trails that led to the camp. The team began to discuss the reasons for the delay. Perhaps their friends had encountered obstacles along the way, or maybe the forest itself had slowed them down. While they tried to remain optimistic, a subtle sense of isolation began to grow. They were experienced researchers, but even the most skilled professionals can feel vulnerable when cut off from help in a wild environment. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, the forest changed again. Shadows lengthened, and the temperature dropped slightly, bringing a crispness to the air. The team lit small lanterns and gathered around the central area of the camp, checking equipment and reviewing plans for the days ahead. They reminded each other of safety protocols, including staying in pairs when venturing into the forest and keeping communication devices on hand at all times. Despite the careful preparation, there was no denying the underlying tension that had settled over them. The forest was beautiful, full of life, but it was also unpredictable and potentially dangerous. Nightfall approached, and with it came the forest's nocturnal symphony. Insects buzzed louder, owls hooted from hidden perches, and the rustling of leaves suggested movement beyond the camp. The team huddled together, both to share warmth and to maintain a sense of security. They spoke softly now, aware that even the smallest noise could draw attention. Their friends were still delayed, and while they waited, they became acutely aware of their isolation. Every snap of a twig or movement in the shadows was noted, analyzed, and discussed. The excitement that had carried them through the morning had shifted to a careful vigilance. Even as anxiety began to creep in, the researchers reminded themselves of why they were there. This forest was a treasure trove of knowledge, a place few humans had explored, and the potential discoveries were invaluable. Their love for science, curiosity, and adventure kept them motivated. Each member of the team drew on their training and experience to remain calm, focusing on the tasks at hand rather than the unknowns lurking in the dark. They prepared for sleep in shifts, ensuring someone was always alert, listening, and ready to respond. The forest, with all its beauty and danger, was a reminder that nature is both a wonder and a challenge, demanding respect and careful attention. As the first stars appeared in the sky, the team reflected on their day. They had arrived, set up camp, and begun the journey they had dreamed of for months. Though their friends had not yet joined them, they had each other and the skills to face whatever might come. Little did they know, the forest held surprises far beyond what they had imagined, and the wait for human companions would soon be interrupted by a presence far more dangerous. Yet, at that moment, hope and excitement still guided their thoughts. As they prepared to face the forest together, ready for the adventure that lay ahead. As the sun climbed higher the next morning, the research team awoke to a forest that felt even more alive than the day before. Birds called from hidden branches, and the wind whispered through the leaves, carrying scents of damp earth and wildflowers. The team moved quietly, aware that in this isolated environment any noise could startle creatures that they had come to observe. They began their morning routine, checking traps, cameras, and notebooks, carefully recording every observation from the previous day. Each detail mattered in their research, but a sense of unease lingered under their focused attention. It started, subtly at first. Small signs around the camp suggested that they were not alone, or at least that the forest had changed overnight. Broken twigs and crushed leaves appeared along the edges of their clearing, forming patterns that didn't seem random. Some footprints were visible in the soft earth, larger than any human and unlike the tracks of animals they had studied before. One of the researchers knelt down, examining them closely. "These aren't from any known species around here," he said quietly. "I've never seen anything like this." The words, though measured, carried weight. The team exchanged uneasy glances, each realizing that their sense of security was being challenged. Despite the growing tension, the team pressed on. They split into pairs to conduct observations deeper in the forest, leaving markers and keeping careful notes of where they had gone. The forest itself seemed to react to their presence, sounds changing when they approached certain areas, and shadows shifting as if watching them. Every rustle of leaves, every sudden movement in the undergrowth made them pause and assess whether it was an animal, a wind gust, or something else entirely. The team was experienced, trained to handle challenging environments, but the subtle, Signs of danger kept them alert in a way that textbooks could never prepare them for. By mid-morning, the evidence of something unusual grew stronger. A series of scratches on tree trunks appeared near their research areas, deep and jagged as if made by powerful claws. Nearby, small animals' remains were discovered, bones carefully stripped clean and arranged in patterns that seemed deliberate. The team's initial curiosity shifted to concern. They gathered to discuss their findings, consulting guides and field manuals, trying to determine what kind of predator could leave such marks. Nothing fit. No known animal in the region hunted with this level of precision or left such eerie signs behind. The forest seemed to grow quieter around them, almost as if it were holding its breath. Even birds that had called loudly in the morning seemed to retreat into the safety of high branches. Shadows moved differently, and the wind carried unfamiliar sounds, low growls or rustles that could not be easily identified. One member of the team, who had previously worked in remote jungles and deserts, suggested they return to camp, but curiosity and the need to gather data kept them going. The line between professional duty and personal safety blurred as the forest eye revealed itself to be more dangerous than anticipated. By noon, the team's unease had turned into cautious vigilance. They noticed more tracks, some crossing paths with their previous observations, others leading into the deeper forest. The pattern suggested intelligence behind the movements, something that planned rather than reacted instinctively. The team began discussing the possibility that whatever they were observing was not just an animal, but a highly territorial and coordinated predator. Their scientific excitement collided with fear. This was the kind of discovery that could redefine understanding of local wildlife, yet the danger was real. Communication with their delayed friends remained inconsistent. Radio signals were faint, interrupted by static, making it impossible to confirm their arrival. The team shared updates, but without the presence of others, the forest felt increasingly isolating. Every moment spent in the clearing or wandering through the trees was filled with heightened awareness. They checked each other's equipment, ensuring cameras, tracking devices, and safety gear were functioning correctly. Any failure could have serious consequences, especially with the unknown predator potentially nearby. As the afternoon sun climbed, the first encounter occurred. A rustling from thick undergrowth drew the attention of one of the pairs, who froze in place. Slowly, cautiously, they approached the source of the sound, only to find evidence of a large animal retreating, its tracks clearly visible in the soft mud. The size and depth of the footprints suggested a creature far stronger than a typical predator. The team members exchanged nervous glances, realizing that they had underestimated the forest's inhabitants. They carefully photographed the tracks, took measurements, and then retreated, making sure to avoid drawing further attention. Back at the camp, tension settled over the group like a heavy blanket. They reviewed their notes and discussed the day's observations. Everyone agreed that the forest was more dangerous than they had anticipated, and that the creatures they had encountered were intelligent, strong, and potentially aggressive. Safety protocols were reinforced. No one would travel alone. Trips into the forest would be brief and measured, and everyone would maintain a constant line of sight with each other. Even as professionals, the team felt the weight of the unknown, pressing down on them. By late afternoon, signs of the predator became even more evident. Broken branches, torn foliage, and deep scratches marked areas they had previously passed through safely. The pattern suggested that the creature, or creatures, were not only moving through the forest but actively tracking the humans. Fear mixed with fascination as the team debated whether to retreat immediately or continue their observations. They decided to maintain a cautious presence, reasoning that any further data could be invaluable, but they prepared contingency plans to leave quickly if necessary. As the sun began to lower, casting long shadows through the forest, the team noticed something that heightened their concern. Small piles of debris, twigs and leaves arranged in a way that seemed deliberate, were scattered around the camp perimeter. The team members realized that these were not random. The predator was marking territory, testing the humans' awareness, or signaling its presence. The realization that they were being studied, not merely observed, sent shivers down their spines. The forest was alive with intelligence they had never expected, and survival depended on caution, awareness, and teamwork. Night began to fall, bringing darkness and a deepening quiet. The team gathered in the center of the camp, sharing a simple meal and reviewing their day. Conversations were quieter now, focused on strategy rather than curiosity. Equipment was checked again, lights were positioned to cover all approaches, and emergency signals were tested. Every sound outside the camp, branches snapping, leaves rustling, was noted and analyzed. They realized that their friend's absence might have been fortunate, as the forest's unknown predators were far more threatening than they could have imagined. As the first stars appeared overhead, the team reflected on their situation. They had come to the forest for study and exploration, but the signs of danger reminded them that nature was unpredictable and often deadly. Their research had taken on a new urgency. Survival was as important as discovery. They understood that their every movement mattered, and that respect for the forest's intelligence and strength was essential. With careful planning, observation, and teamwork, they could navigate the challenges ahead. But the forest had made it clear that nothing could be taken for granted. The night was darker than the team expected. The canopy above blocked much of the moonlight, leaving the forest floor in deep shadow. Every sound was magnified. The snap of a branch, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an unknown creature. The researchers huddled near their campfire, which flickered weakly against the oppressive darkness. They tried to stay calm, reminding themselves that the forest was full of life and that most creatures preferred to avoid humans. Yet deep inside, a growing sense of unease gnawed at each of them. The tracks and signs they had discovered earlier in the day had not disappeared. They were still fresh, scattered around the camp like an unspoken warning. Then it began. At first it was subtle, a low rustling in the undergrowth beyond the clearing, a soft movement that seemed coordinated, deliberate. The team froze, listening intently. Their eyes scanned the darkness, but the shadows were too thick to see clearly. One of the researchers whispered, "It's coming closer." The others nodded silently, hearts pounding. They had studied the forest, prepared for encounters with animals. But this felt different. There was intelligence in the movement, an awareness that unsettled them more than any known predator ever had. Moments later, shapes began to emerge from the shadows. At first, it was just movement, a blur in the dim light. But then the team could make out forms that were larger, stronger, and unlike anything they had studied. The creatures, which local stories had referred to as Deathworlders, moved with precision and coordination. They were fast, their muscles rippling under thick, dark hides, and their eyes reflected the faint light, glowing with a predatory intelligence. The researchers realized instantly that this was not a random encounter. The Deathworlders were aware of them, watching and calculating. Every instinct screamed that the team was being hunted. Panic threatened to rise, but the team forced themselves to remain calm. They recalled their safety protocols and quickly moved to fortify their camp. Large branches and logs were arranged to form barriers around the tents, and trip lines were set up to alert them if anything approached. Communication devices were turned on, and signals were kept ready in case an emergency call could get through. Despite these precautions, every sound from the darkness made them jump. The Deathworlders circled the clearing, moving silently and carefully, testing the human defenses. The researchers realized that retreating into the forest was not an option. There was no clear path, and the creatures would anticipate their every move. Time seemed to stretch. The forest, alive with unseen movement, pressed in from all sides. The team huddled together, whispering plans and sharing observations. Each member contributed ideas for how to evade or distract the predators, suggesting noisemakers, light flashes, and movement to confuse them. They remembered the patterns they had seen during the day, the deliberate marks, the careful observation by the creatures. This was a hunting strategy, they realized, not random wandering. Fear mixed with awe as they watched the intelligence of the Deathworlders unfold before their eyes. Hours passed and the tension grew unbearable. The researchers moved slowly, avoiding sudden gestures, trying not to attract attention. Every rustle in the underbrush made them tense. Every shadow seemed to hold a predator. Yet, in the midst of fear, they relied on their training and teamwork. One member suggested splitting into smaller groups to better observe the creatures' movements without drawing attention. Another recommended reinforcing barriers with more branches and rocks. The decisions had to be quick but careful, each action potentially making the difference between survival and disaster. As night deepened, the Deathworlders became bolder. They approached closer to the camp, testing the boundaries, sniffing the air and examining the barriers. One of the researchers noticed that the creatures seemed to communicate with subtle gestures and sounds, coordinating their movements to cover multiple approaches at once. The team realized that these were not simple animals. They were organized, methodical, and highly aware of their surroundings. Survival depended not just on strength, but on careful observation, intelligence, and staying one step ahead. Eolai. Moment of courage. One member quietly crept to a higher vantage point in a tree to observe the clearing from above. From this perspective, the patterns became clearer. The Deathworlders were not moving randomly. They were predicting the humans' actions, adjusting positions to block exits, and using the terrain to their advantage. This knowledge gave the team a strategic edge, but also made the danger feel even more real. Every decision, every movement had to be precise. Mistakes could be costly. Hours later, the forest seemed to quiet slightly, though the threat never fully disappeared. The team remained alert, watching for any movement and ready to respond. They shared whispered discussions about the creatures, theorizing about their behavior, communication, and strength. Some speculated that these Deathworlders were part of a small, isolated population that had adapted to the forest in ways humans could barely understand. Others focused on survival, discussing how to maintain vigilance until daylight when the forest's patterns might change. As dawn approached, faint light began to filter through the thick canopy, casting long, shifting shadows across the forest floor. The Deathworlders, sensing the change, retreated slowly into the undergrowth, fading from view. The team exhaled in relief, their muscles relaxing slightly, but they knew the danger was far from over. The night had shown them the intelligence, coordination, and power of the predators. They had survived through careful planning, teamwork, and observation, but the forest had made its message clear. This was not a place to be taken lightly. In the aftermath of the encounter, the team regrouped, taking stock of their situation. Equipment had to be checked, observations recorded, and plans adjusted. They reinforced the camp even more carefully, knowing that the forest's predators could return at any time. Conversations among the researchers focused on strategy, not fear. They had learned that survival depended on calm, logical thinking and constant awareness. Even in the face of something far beyond their prior experience, the team maintained their professionalism and determination. By mid-morning, the forest felt alive with new energy. The Deathworlders were no longer immediately present, but their influence lingered. Every sound, shadow, and movement reminded the researchers that they were visitors in a place ruled by beings more powerful and intelligent than most humans could imagine. The team understood that the forest held dangers they could not fully predict, and that vigilance and respect were essential. Their work was no longer just about research. It was about understanding a world where survival and science were intertwined, and where each day could bring new challenges. The experience strengthened the team's bond. They realized that despite the fear and uncertainty, they had relied on each other and their training to survive. Trust, communication, and careful observation had kept them safe. They also understood that their friends, delayed by circumstance, had unknowingly been spared from witnessing the night's events firsthand. The forest had tested them, and they had endured, learning lessons about intelligence, strategy, and respect for the unknown. By the time the sun fully rose, painting the forest in warm morning light, the team had recovered some calm, though the memory of the night's encounter remained vivid. They prepared for the day ahead, knowing that the forest still held mysteries and dangers, and that their research would now require even greater caution. The Deathworlders had shown themselves to be formidable, but the team's determination, To survive and continue their work had only grown stronger. They had faced a night of fear, uncertainty, and intelligence beyond anything they had expected, and they had endured, ready to meet whatever challenges the forest might bring next. The morning air was cool and fresh, but the team felt a tension that refused to fade. After the previous night's encounter, the forest no longer seemed just alive. It felt aware. Every rustle, every shadow, even the faintest scent carried potential danger. The researchers moved cautiously, checking each other's equipment and ensuring that their communication devices were functional. The Deathworlders had shown their intelligence and coordination, and the team knew that underestimating them would be a mistake. They decided to implement a detailed strategy for the day. Pairs would travel short distances into the forest to gather observations, always maintaining visual contact with the rest of the team. Barriers were reinforced at the camp, with extra logs and branches creating multiple layers to slow down any intruders. Trip lines were set and subtle alarms made from tin cans and strings were arranged around the perimeter. Every precaution was necessary, for the forest was no longer simply a place of study. It was a challenge to their survival instincts. As the morning progressed, the team noticed subtle changes in the forest's behavior. Birdsong was reduced to occasional hesitant chirps. Small animals had retreated to hidden spaces, leaving the undergrowth eerily quiet. Shadows moved with unnatural coordination, almost as if the forest itself were alive with unseen watchers. The Deathworlders were not far, and the team knew it. Observing from a high vantage point, one researcher noticed movement that seemed calculated. One creature would pause, glance toward the camp, then move in another direction, as if testing the human's awareness. The intelligence and planning behind these movements were unnerving. The team's members began using creative distractions to protect themselves. Lights flashed from hidden cameras, branches were thrown to make noise at a distance, and objects were dropped strategically to confuse the predators. Every movement was calculated to delay or mislead the Deathworlders without drawing direct attention. Even small mistakes could trigger a chase or an attack, so each step was measured. The forest was no longer a place of simple observation. It had become a complex game of strategy, one where lives depended on careful planning and quick thinking. One of the researchers suggested splitting into groups to cover more ground while reducing risk. They carefully mapped their paths, marking safe zones and potential hiding spots. Each group kept constant communication with the camp, reporting unusual signs, tracks, or noises. At one point, a group discovered fresh tracks near the stream, evidence that the Deathworlders were exploring multiple approaches to the camp simultaneously. The realization reinforced the team's need for constant vigilance. They were learning in real time how intelligent and adaptive these creatures truly were. By midday, exhaustion began to creep in. Constant alertness, careful movement, and the emotional strain of facing unknown predators weighed heavily on the team. Yet they refused to stop. They knew that survival required focus and cooperation. They took short breaks, sharing food and water, and used those moments to discuss observations and adjust strategies. Each new detail was recorded carefully, both for the safety of the team and for their ongoing research. The forest had become a living classroom, harsh and demanding, teaching lessons that no textbook could. In the afternoon, the Deathworlders made a bold move. One creature appeared near the edge of the camp, clearly observing the team's activities. It paused, then retreated, only to return moments later with another. The creatures were testing boundaries, learning patterns, and assessing the humans' responses. The team responded with careful precision, using noise and light distractions to keep the predators at a distance. The encounter reinforced the understanding that this was no ordinary forest. The creatures were strong, intelligent, and unafraid to assert dominance over their territory. Despite the constant threat, the team found moments of ingenuity. They constructed temporary observation posts, camouflaged with branches and leaves, where they could safely monitor the Deathworlders without being noticed. They experimented with sound distractions, using recordings of animal calls to divert attention. Every successful maneuver built confidence, showing that while the predators were formidable, careful planning and teamwork could create opportunities for safety and study. As the day wore on, the forest's energy seemed to shift. The creatures became less bold, retreating slightly into the shadows, though their presence was always felt. The team used the relative calm to reinforce barriers and check all devices. Conversations focused on lessons learned, patterns of movement, intelligence displayed, and strategies that worked or failed. The researchers recognized the value of the experience. Though fear remained, it had been transformed into awareness, respect, and strategic thinking. By evening, the forest had settled into a tense quiet. The Deathworlders were out of immediate sight but not gone. The team gathered around the campfire, reflecting on the day's challenges. They shared small victories and acknowledged mistakes, using each as a learning opportunity. They understood that survival required constant observation, adaptability, and cooperation. The forest, with all its dangers and intelligence, had become more than a research site. It was a test of human endurance, ingenuity, and courage. As night approached, the team prepared for another potentially difficult evening. Lights were positioned, barriers checked, and emergency signals ready. Every member knew the importance of remaining alert, of protecting each other, and of respecting the intelligence of the predators. They realized that survival was not just about strength or equipment, but about awareness, strategy, and trust. The forest demanded respect, and the team had learned through careful observation and quick thinking that it would reward those who understood it and punish those who ignored it. Dawn broke over the forest, washing the camp in soft, golden light. The events of the previous day and night had left the team exhausted, but also sharper and more alert. Every member had experienced fear, tension, and adrenaline, but they had endured. They checked equipment, reinforced barriers, and carefully planned their movements for the day. The forest, still alive with its usual sounds, seemed calmer with the daylight, but the team knew the Deathworlders could strike at any time. Survival depended on constant vigilance, careful decisions, and trust in each other. The morning was spent reviewing the forest's signs. Tracks, disturbed undergrowth, and broken branches told a story of the predators' movements. The team studied patterns, noting where the Deathworlders had been and how they seemed to respond to the humans' presence. These observations were not only crucial for safety, but also for understanding the creature's intelligence. They realized that every interaction, no matter how small, provided insight into strategy, communication, and territorial behavior. By late morning, a plan emerged. The team would use the daylight to move to a higher vantage point on a ridge, allowing them to see further into the forest and identify potential threats before they approached. Carefully, they navigated the undergrowth, staying low and quiet. Each step was deliberate. Each sound was monitored. The Deathworlders, aware of movement, were likely watching, analyzing, and predicting. The team moved like a single organism, each member aware of the others, ensuring no one was left vulnerable. Reaching the ridge, the team paused to take in the view. The forest stretched endlessly, a maze of trees, shadows, and hidden life. From this height, they could see movement below, including subtle hints of the Deathworlders. They studied the patterns, noting how the predators moved in groups, tested boundaries, and responded to stimuli. The team shared insights, refining strategies, and predicting potential encounters. Knowledge, they realized, was as important as physical preparation. Understanding the behavior of the Deathworlders gave them a chance to stay one step ahead. Hours passed as the team continued their careful monitoring. The predators were intelligent, but they had limits. Using what they had learned, the researchers created diversions and safe zones, moving strategically to avoid confrontation. They communicated constantly, sharing observations and adjusting plans. The forest, once a place of fear, had become a dynamic environment for learning, testing both knowledge and courage. The team discovered that cooperation, awareness, and respect for the predator's intelligence were the keys to survival. By mid-afternoon, faint sounds of distant helicopters broke the forest's quiet. Rescue had arrived. Relief washed over the team, tempered by the exhaustion and tension of the past days. The Deathworlders, sensing new human activity, withdrew into the shadows. The researchers were safe, though deeply aware that the forest remained as unpredictable as ever. Their friends who had been delayed arrived shortly after, unaware of the intensity of the survival they had narrowly avoided. The team spent the remainder of the day reflecting. They recorded observations, analyzed patterns, and reinforced their understanding of the forest's intelligence. Survival had depended on focus, strategy, and trust in each other. They realized that the experience had transformed them. Fear had taught caution, vigilance had taught awareness, and the forest had taught respect. The Deathworlders, powerful and intelligent, had been both a threat and a teacher. As evening fell, the researchers gathered one last time before breaking camp. They shared quiet conversation, recounting moments of tension, insight, and triumph. The forest had challenged them in ways they had never imagined, revealing a world where intelligence, strategy, and survival intersected in extraordinary ways. They had faced a night of fear, a day of strategy, and countless unknowns, and had emerged wiser and stronger. Packing up, they knew the forest's memory would remain with them. It had been a place of discovery, danger, and growth. Every sound, shadow, and movement had carried lessons that could never be forgotten. The experience underscored the delicate balance of nature, the unpredictability of wildlife, and the resilience of humans when confronted with challenges beyond expectation. They left the forest with respect, knowledge, and a story of survival that would remain with them forever.